Lucas were already waiting, sitting at their usual table near the window, both pretending to scroll on their phones while actually watching the door. Emma arrived a few minutes late, apologizing with a soft smile as she brushed rain from her jacket, and when she sat down, something shifted, subtle but real, because she looked different that evening, calmer yet fragile, like someone who had recently let go of something heavy. Her last relationship had ended weeks ago, and though she rarely spoke about it, both men could see the change in her eyes, a mix of relief and sadness, and neither of them knew exactly how to respond to it. They ordered coffee, talked about small things at first, work stress, traffic, a new movie Lucas had seen, but every sentence felt like it was circling something deeper, something waiting to be named. Emma noticed it too, the way Daniel leaned forward when she spoke, the way Lucas watched her reactions more than her words, and it made her nervous in a way she could not explain, because these were not strangers, they were people she trusted completely. Years ago, they had met through mutual friends, and over time the three of them had grown close enough that others often joked about how inseparable they were, but none of those jokes had ever crossed a line, not until now. Daniel had always been open and expressive, the kind of man who said what he felt even when it scared him, while Lucas was quieter, thoughtful, choosing his words with care, and Emma had always felt safe between those two energies, never pulled too far in one direction. As the rain tapped against the glass, Daniel finally stopped pretending to look at his phone, took a slow breath, and spoke in a tone that was calm but serious, saying that he felt like they were standing at the edge of something important and that pretending otherwise no longer felt honest. Emma froze for a moment, her fingers tightening around her cup, because she knew exactly what he meant even before he said more, and that knowledge made her heart beat faster. Lucas did not interrupt, but his eyes stayed on Emma, steady and gentle, as if silently telling her that whatever happened next, she would not face it alone. Daniel explained, without rushing or using dramatic words, that the connection between them had grown beyond friendship, not suddenly but slowly, shaped by shared moments, trust, and care, and that ignoring it was starting to feel like a lie. He made it clear that this was not a demand, not a plan already decided, but a truth he could no longer keep inside. Emma listened without speaking, feeling emotions rise all at once, surprise, fear, warmth, confusion, because part of her had sensed this long ago but had never allowed herself to think it through. She looked at Lucas, expecting him to pull away or correct Daniel, but instead he nodded slightly, adding that he felt the same and that what mattered most to him was honesty and respect, not pressure or expectations. The cafe felt suddenly smaller, the sounds of other customers fading as Emma tried to understand what she was feeling, because she had just come out of a relationship that failed partly because she had ignored her own needs, and the idea of stepping into something new, something undefined, scared her deeply. She asked what they meant, her voice calm but careful, and Daniel answered that they were not asking her to decide anything that night, only to acknowledge what already existed between them and to stop pretending it was not there. Emma felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness but from the weight of being truly seen, and she quickly looked down, embarrassed by the intensity of her reaction. Lucas gently reminded her that whatever she felt was valid and that she was allowed to take time, to think, to say no if that was her truth. That kindness made the moment heavier rather than lighter, because it showed her that this was not about desire alone but about care and responsibility. Outside, the rain grew louder, and Emma realized that the question placed in front of her was not simple, because it challenged everything she had been taught about love and safety, yet it also felt strangely honest. She did not answer them that night, not because she did not care, but because she cared too much to respond without understanding herself first. When they left the cafe together, walking toward the parking lot under the same umbrella, there was a new awareness in every step, in every silence, and as Emma drove home alone later, she replayed every word in her mind, knowing that the question Daniel had raised could not be forgotten, and that whether she accepted it or not, things would never return to how they were before. After that night, Emma tried to return to normal life, but nothing felt normal anymore, because every small moment carried weight and every silence felt louder than words, and the days moved faster than her thoughts could settle. She woke early, ran through quiet streets, worked long hours, and filled her schedule on purpose, hoping movement would quiet her mind, yet Daniel and Lucas were always there in her thoughts, not as a problem but as a presence she could not ignore. Messages between them stayed polite and light at first, short check-ins, jokes, shared memories, but underneath each word was careful awareness, as if all three knew they were standing on thin ice that could either break or hold them. Emma noticed how differently she remembered past moments now, realizing how often Daniel had stayed late just to make sure she got home safe, how Lucas had always been the one who listened without judging, and how their friendship had slowly become a place where she felt understood in ways she never fully admitted to herself. One evening, Lucas invited her to join him for a walk by the river, something they had done many times before, but this time felt different from the moment she agreed. The sky was cloudy, the air cold, and they walked side by side without rushing, talking about work, family, and small plans, yet both avoided the subject that mattered most until Emma finally stopped and asked him why he had agreed with Daniel that night. Lucas did not answer quickly. He looked at the water moving steadily past them and said that sometimes feelings grow quietly, not through excitement but through trust, and that for him, Emma had become someone whose happiness mattered deeply, not in a way that demanded anything, but in a way that asked for honesty. His words were calm, not persuasive, and that calm made Emma feel safe enough to admit that she was afraid of making the wrong choice again, afraid of hurting people she cared about, and afraid of wanting something that might not last. Lucas told her fear was not a sign to stop, but a sign that something mattered, and that whatever she decided, it had to come from her, not from pressure or expectation. The next day, Daniel asked her to meet for coffee, and unlike before, he spoke quickly, saying he wanted to be clear that he would never want her to feel trapped or rushed, that his feelings were real but her freedom mattered more, and that if she chose to walk away, he would respect that completely. Emma listened, noticing how different their styles were, yet how both came from the same place of care, and she realized that no one was trying to convince her with words, only with truth. That night, alone in her apartment, Emma sat by the window and thought about her past, about the times she stayed quiet when she should have spoken, about the comfort she had chosen over honesty, and about how lonely it felt to hide parts of herself just to fit into a simple story. She understood that what scared her was not Daniel or Lucas, but the idea of choosing a path that others might not understand, a path that required communication, patience, and courage instead of rules and labels. Over the next few days, the three of them met together again, this time with open conversation instead of tension, setting clear boundaries, agreeing that nothing would happen without trust, respect, and time, and that no one would be left unheard. Emma felt relief in those talks, not because answers appeared suddenly, but because the space to think felt safe rather than lonely. She laughed more easily, spoke more honestly, and noticed how the dynamic between them shifted from uncertainty to quiet understanding, and even though she had not said yes or no, she could feel something forming, not a decision yet, but clarity. Still, doubt followed her, especially at night, when she imagined how complicated things could become, how fragile balance could be, and how deeply she might be hurt if things went wrong. Yet every doubt was matched by a moment of warmth, a message checking in, a shared silence that felt peaceful rather than awkward, and slowly, Emma began to realize that this was not about being convinced by others, but about allowing herself to accept feelings she had denied for too long. By the end of the week, she knew she could not stay in the middle forever, because waiting was becoming its own kind of decision, and as she looked at her phone, seeing both Daniel's and Lucas's names waiting for her reply, she understood that part 2 of her story was not about answers yet, but about learning to listen to herself, even when the truth felt unfamiliar and risky. Emma did not wake up one morning with sudden courage, but the decision began forming quietly as she moved through her days, noticing how her body reacted when Daniel or Lucas entered a room, how her chest felt lighter instead of tense, and how honesty no longer seemed as frightening as silence. She stopped avoiding the question and started asking herself harder ones, about what she truly wanted rather than what felt easiest to explain, and the answers surprised her because they were calmer than she expected. She realized she was no longer choosing between people, but between fear and truth, and that understanding pushed her forward. One evening, she asked both of them to meet her at a small park near her apartment, a place filled with soft lights and quiet paths, and when they arrived, she could see concern on their faces, not impatience, which reassured her before she even spoke. Emma did not give a long speech. She spoke clearly, saying she had spent days thinking, remembering, questioning herself, and that she finally understood that walking away just to keep life simple would leave her feeling empty. She admitted she was scared, not of them, but of choosing something that required effort and honesty every day, and she told them she did not want promises or certainty, only openness and respect. Daniel listened closely, his usual energy softened, and Lucas stayed still, focused, letting her words land fully. And when she said she wanted to try, not rush, not define everything, but step forward together, the silence that followed felt heavy but warm. Daniel smiled slowly, not in relief alone but in responsibility, and said he agreed to move carefully, knowing that trust mattered more than excitement. Lucas added that choosing each other did not mean losing balance, but creating it, and that the moment Emma felt unsure, they would pause, talk, and adjust rather than push forward blindly. Emma felt a deep sense of grounding in those words, as if the ground beneath her had finally stopped shifting. They talked longer, about expectations, boundaries, time, and the importance of keeping communication open even when it felt uncomfortable, and Emma noticed how mature the conversation felt, how different it was from past relationships where emotions were hidden or rushed. As the evening cooled, Emma realized that what she was agreeing to was not perfection but presence, not certainty but care. And that felt enough. Over the next days, they moved slowly into this new space, spending time together in ordinary ways, cooking meals, walking through the city, sharing laughter without forcing meaning onto every moment, and Emma found comfort in how natural it felt. There were moments of hesitation, brief flashes of doubt when she wondered if she was strong enough for something that did not fit common expectations, but each time, those doubts softened through conversation rather than silence. Daniel learned to slow down, Lucas learned to speak up more, and Emma learned that her voice mattered equally, not less, not more, but fully. She noticed that choosing honesty changed her in subtle ways. She stood straighter, laughed more freely, and stopped apologizing for feeling deeply. Still, she understood this choice did not protect her from pain, and that awareness made her careful rather than reckless. One night, sitting alone after spending time with them, Emma acknowledged that this was the first time she had chosen something not because it felt safe to others, but because it felt true to her, and that realization brought quiet tears she did not try to stop. She knew the road ahead would require patience, courage, and ongoing effort, and that there would be moments when the world outside would not understand what they were building, but for the first time, she felt ready to face that discomfort. By choosing to step forward, Emma did not feel like she was being convinced anymore. She felt like she was finally convincing herself that her heart deserved honesty, even if the path was uncertain, and as she looked ahead, she understood that part 3 of her story was not about the decision itself, but about owning it fully, knowing that whatever came next, she had chosen with open eyes, and a steady heart. Life did not slow down after Emma said yes. Instead, it moved forward with quiet momentum, and she quickly learned that choosing honesty was only the beginning, not the ending she once imagined. Days blended into weeks as the three of them settled into a rhythm built on communication rather than assumption, and Emma found that what felt complicated in theory became manageable through patience and care. They faced small challenges early, moments of misunderstanding or emotional distance, but instead of pulling away, they paused, talked, and listened, learning how differently each of them processed fear and hope. Emma noticed how Daniel learned to hold space instead of rushing to fix things, how Lucas became more open with his thoughts instead of keeping them inside, and how she herself stopped shrinking when conversations felt difficult. There were evenings filled with laughter and others spent in thoughtful silence, and both felt equally meaningful because nothing was forced or hidden. Outside opinions stayed at a distance. Emma chose not to explain everything to everyone, understanding that not all stories needed approval to be real. What mattered was how she felt waking up each morning, grounded rather than restless, aware rather than uncertain. She felt supported without being controlled, desired without being overwhelmed, and respected without having to ask for it. Still, doubt did not disappear completely, and some nights she lay awake wondering how long balance could last, whether the world would test them harder than they expected, and whether she would have the strength to face that pressure if it came. Yet every time fear surfaced, it was met with reassurance through action, not promises, and Emma learned that trust was built in ordinary moments rather than dramatic ones. She realized she was no longer measuring love by intensity alone, but by consistency, by the way difficult conversations did not lead to distance, and by how she was encouraged to remain herself rather than change to fit someone else's comfort. Over time, she saw how this experience reshaped her understanding of relationships, teaching her that commitment was not about limiting options, but about choosing honesty every day. One evening, as they stood together watching city lights reflect across the water, Emma felt a calm certainty settle in her chest, not because the future was clear, but because she trusted how they would face it together. She understood then that being convinced was never the true story, being heard was. The choice she made did not erase risk, but it gave her something she had searched for quietly her entire life, a space where she could be fully present without fear of judgment or loss of self. As the night deepened and the city moved around them, Emma smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because it was real, and she knew that whatever challenges came next, she had already done the hardest part by choosing truth over comfort, and that decision would continue to guide her long after this chapter ended.